So this month's talk is on social health, and if you guys don't know, I'm Dr. Rahman Schumann, and I do these monthly talks on different topics. I thought social health would be a good topic as we're getting into kind of a dark period of the year, and have some kind of family holidays and others many of us go to or sort of are at least invited to. And sometimes that's a really positive thing, and sometimes that's sort of a negative thing, unfortunately, in some people's lives too. So just acknowledging that. And just again, we're social beings. We really have to exist in social circles. I think it's a part of just health in general. So we'll talk a little bit about just what that means as far as connecting with people, what different interactions kind of bring to our lives, and maybe even conflict, and how we can get through some, even conflict or difficult social situations. So as always, my disclaimer here, again, this is just for general information purposes. I'm not here to be anyone's doctor, especially just watching online. The people that are my patients, obviously we can talk on the side about different things in depth, but this in general is just, or this video is just for general information. And then I have no conflicts of interest with anything that I talk about here as far as resources, books, podcasts, anything like that. They're just things that I enjoy or think are helpful in people's lives. So I always start with some objectives here, just about what are we trying to get accomplished in this talk. So I'd like to talk about some biological aspects of social interaction. So a lot of people might regard social interaction as sort of just something else, not a part of health for whatever reason, or that it's just mental. And that's not actually true. There's biochemical kind of reactions and other things that are happening, and it's a part of deeper biology of, not just human species, but lots of other species, not even just mammals, expands to a lot of the other animal kingdom. Expanding or examining a little bit of relationship types. This is, again, just talking about, different types of relationships and how those are different. For example, again, parent-child, boss, mentor, friends, families, things of those nature. Exploring different interaction styles, and different ideas around this. So anyway, we'll get into what that means. How to assess the health of your relationships. So just, again, some ideas or some things to reflect on. And then ideas to increase social health. And of course, what I'm always kind of the last two, the most important maybe, those to how to get, more of this, how to become healthier, and then places to go to learn more about some specific things that I might mention here. So social interactions and health, how are these things tied together? Like I said, on a very deep biological level, these are things that are basically unavoidable as human beings. We as kind of mammals in the animal kingdom, social interaction in the form of play from a very young age, parenting interactions are just essential kind of parts of our lives. So early on, we form sort of attachment styles with our parents, as well as, or well, even if they're not our parents, let's say our caregivers. And then from that point forward, our brain sort of develops in a certain way. A lot of research is showing that this is a lot of sort of unconscious parts of our brain, the right brain, that's really responsible for a lot of this. So a lot of times this is more in that kind of emotional sphere of the brain, and we can't sort of always think our way out of it. So that's just kind of a key part of, just understanding yourself in the setting of social environments, right? That we're all going to want to socialize maybe in a slightly different way, and that sometimes, the things that people say or do, right, might be driven often by things that sometimes it's really hard to become aware of. And that is the actual kind of neurobiological model of this, right? The right brain drives a lot of these types of interactions. It's where we sort of mirror people. Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
What about the third eye?
So
I can get that on my computer. I mean,
okay.
on my
Yeah, the
cell phone.
third eye is a sort of concept in philosophy, right? So I think that refers to sort of seeing through some of the myths or other kind of misconceptions of the world around you, right? So that's a bit more of a philosophical kind of term. I wouldn't say there's anything in the sort of neurobiological model that really is quote unquote the third eye, right? So that's a little bit more of a mind or philosophy kind of term. So yeah, so yeah, does that answer your question?
Well, it comes on my cell phone
Sure.
about the third, and I can't remember what it was called. I should.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, like I said, that's not necessarily, that's a kind of philosophical concept. While that's an interest of mine, I'm trying to focus on something kind of slightly different here. So yeah, brain development, right? So that's what I was kind of getting at, is that, this is this is tied to your biology in a very strong way, neurobiology, the way that you interact with, sort of the folks around you, caregivers, friends, family, whoever that may be from a young age, can set some of the way you may interact with people moving forward. Again, a huge body of research that's really supporting some of this type of thing now, and that it's absolutely biological. The importance of play. So again, this is in that from a very young age, right? That socialization, and playing with peers from a childhood is what's shown to really develop kind of sturdy, resilient adults, basically. And part of that is that, those interactions that you have with other people is almost like practice for interactions that you might have in sort of other more mature adult social environments, right? So it's sort of, again, it helps develop those literal brain areas, right, that are made for this kind of thing. There's the same kind of concept with exercise, plays out in the brain in so many ways, right? If you don't sort of lift that muscle of your social interaction, then you're not going to necessarily be really strong in that area. And so, again, play is kind of that practice or exercise of that social part of our brains. For healthy development really is what we're seeing for healthy people. Effects of isolation, right? This is kind of the opposite, right? So when we take people and put them in very isolated situations, or maybe they're not completely, isolated physically, but sort of mentally feel isolated, loneliness, you might call that, right? We've seen how damaging that is to health, right? Loneliness is not only deadly if it leads to, let's say, suicide, which would be the kind of direct path, perhaps, to that, which is a serious problem, right? But even if that's not the outcome, you may die early from heart disease, from, dementia, from maybe metabolic disorder, because it's harder to sort of make decisions maybe you need to make, or all sorts of other things. And this is very much supported by the research, right, that we see these associations with things like isolation and loneliness and the increase of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and even metabolic disease, right? So these quote unquote physical diseases. So again, social interaction in every way kind of is really deeply tied to every aspect of health, and chronic disease especially, or let's say the opposite of that, kind of being socially healthy is an essential part of avoiding some of these preventable chronic problems, right? Which is, again, part of what I'm really trying to advocate we all do, and what primary care hopefully is, good primary care is providing for us. So Blue Zones research, what is this, right? So the Blue Zones there's a book written by, I believe, David Buettner and some other folks, researchers, that talk about these areas on Earth where disproportionate or higher proportion of people are making it to 100 years old, right? And we examine the habits sometimes because it seems that it is not necessarily genetic. Like, some people do hit the genetic jackpot and basically can smoke cigarettes and live to 121. I think famously the oldest woman, that was one of her kind of what she attributed her longevity to, which again is not necessarily evidence-based, right? That's just one person. But again, what we see, right, is that these places that have a higher proportion, it's not due to genetics, it's due to something they're doing, right, and the way that they're living. And so this research project was trying to get at the bottom of what these essential items are. And, a high degree of social interaction. People had family dinners. They would walk down the street and say hello to their neighbors and other people down the street. There were more social gatherings and events, in these kind of towns around the world that had this feature, and again, that social networking and strong connection with just not only maybe your family members or close, caregiving members, but even the town and kind of community around you, right? Having a sense of community and being a part of a bigger community was a very common feature of these areas. So again, to me, these are some proofs that social health is not something that is, this woo kind of concept of not being, or you can just, be a lone wolf and get away or never interact with people in a meaningful way and be healthy. I just don't see that the research in biology is really supporting an idea like that. So I think we have to find ways to really have meaningful connections with other people if we want to be fully healthy, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now kind of moving on to just different relationship types and just touching a little bit about each of these and how these are unique and how these play a unique role in our lives. So I'll start with kind of that first relationship that many of us have and have had, and again, is sort of essential. And again, I realize that people come from all sorts of different walks and beginnings, and sometimes we don't have the best maybe caregiver models. But for those of us that do have someone like a parent or a loved caregiver in our lives, that is a very important and impactful relationship. Certainly when we see children that have a lack of that, right, we see that they have a much harder time sometimes being fully healthy in so many different ways, right? So we know that this relationship is so important as human beings. There's a concept called attachment styles here, where there's sort of secure and insecure. There's even some organized and disorganized versions. Again, I'm not an expert on some of these attachment styles. There are several other books and authors that have lots of good material on this. But that is something that really is what I was talking about earlier, kind of that right brain set interaction style that can be changed over your lifetime, but really does impact how you're going to interact with other people as you age from, childhood into, school ages, adolescent and onward. Again, it does, this is one of these kind of critical learning type things where yes, we can sort of bend that over a much longer arc of time, but whatever set early on really seems to be kind of a place where you're going to start, right? And then it's harder to sometimes move after that, or it takes a lot longer time. So again, just exploring that this is an important relationship, or maybe that if you don't have that's an important sort of hole to fill in your life in some sort of way. Is an important concept here. Just, not ignoring this, right? And even if this is maybe a negative relationship in your life, maybe even more importantly, making sure that that's addressed somehow, primarily through things like maybe psychotherapy and other kind of, again, talk to your doctor, talk to maybe a mentor, talk to, if you have some sort of mental health care worker, please discuss that with them and make that a goal, maybe of something like counseling, therapy, right, is sort of what I'm getting at here. But again, this is also can be a very positive thing, right, in our lives, acknowledging, I think we'll get to the concepts of gratitude and connection, and just realizing that if this is your parent, that's sort of how you got here on Earth, and biologically, genetically, right, that's an important connection. And sort of being medical, right, I would say that even extends to some, let's say specifically in this, to other health problems, like physical genetic health problems that might be clues to what your health might look like in your future, right? So for that reason, it can be a very important relationship. So anyway, those are all the reasons, in my opinion, that this is something that all of us should sort of respect and at least acknowledge. Hopefully we can turn this somehow into a positive thing in our life and express some gratitude, even if that's just only for thanks for giving me this existence in life that I have, right? Or maybe to even acknowledge that perhaps if they're not in your lives, right, that maybe your life is, perhaps, you don't know, your life with that other person that you never knew could be, you have no idea what that could have been like, right? So letting go, right, of some of that, some perhaps. Friends and acquaintances, right? I think this is another really important thing in life, right? So I think we all need at least a couple good friends. There's, so much I've heard, not only my personal experience with folks that are nearing, let's say, the end of life, or sort of that talk about happiness and being, your full self, as far as experts, podcasts, interviews, books, etc., right? Sort of point to connection with other people is sort of one of the most important things when they really reflect back on everything about their lives, right? The career, the money, the this and that, things that sometimes they otherwise thought are important, right? I often hear that what was more important, or what they realized was more important later on, or it was, connections with other people and time spent with other people. And often this is friends too, not just our caregivers and family, right? But often if we don't have some of that, this becomes maybe perhaps even more important, right? To have that friend circle and support circle and people that you can bounce things off, be accountable for. And even then acquaintances, right? This might be just, again, you can have sort of more meaningful sort of surface even relationships with people, even if it's, you're not going to let them into your inner circle. They don't necessarily have to get into, again, depending on how introspective or sorry, extroverted or introverted you are, right? You may sort of want different amounts of people in different spheres here, right? And I think that's totally okay. And that's something that we should all sort of think about and decide, no, like, that, and just accept that that's okay, right? We don't have to let everyone in, but I do think it's important to be vulnerable with at least, a couple people in your life and feel comfortable. Go ahead.
First thing, the caregiver, I took care of my mom till she was 92. And, and I had things coming in that I took care of, or I even slept with her sometime.
Wow.
But then on friends, I was born and raised here, but then I was gone several years. But then I play cards with my friends on Monday and Wednesday. And there's usually 8 and sometimes there's 12 of us. But we have a good time, and I think people need to get into stuff like that and socialize and play cards with your friends or whatever.
Absolutely.
And it's always open to other people that would like to play with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we get together in Florence, down at the Florence deal.
Right.
And they're having a Christmas party Saturday with everybody coming in that are members of the deal.
Absolutely.
So it's really a get together. So if there's some people that want to get into that group, they're welcome.
Great.
And if they
Great.
want to play cards with us, they're welcome.
Great.
If they don't know how to play the cards that we do, we'll teach them.
Great. Great. And again,
So
I think there's a lot of people, I think Kenyon, to me, I've sort of heard a lot of types of things like this, especially for a small town like this. Personally, I've felt, or maybe just because it is a small town and I'm a small town physician, so people maybe tell me about it. But I've been sort of shocked more here than in any other practice, maybe, of the kinds of little events I hear about. And that might, again, and maybe that's just because everyone's in such a small area. But I've been sort of pleasantly surprised by the amount of sort of little social circles that exist in this small town.
We have Florence. We go to Florence.
Sure.
So we got
Well, let's say
people-
Fremont County, let me
We
say.
got people from Florence that are going to cards also.
Sure,
So there's a big group of us.
sure.
So it really makes it nice.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And then again, that's Miss Lou inviting everybody to cards there. So here in Fremont County. So so family here, I would kind of expand this word, right, to be something a little bit bigger than just our biological family. Again, I focused a little bit on that first one bullet point there. But I do think that, again, family can really be who we put into that vulnerable inner sphere, and they don't necessarily always have to be biological. Some other guests here mentioned that, I had my literal family on here last visit. And then, I see here now that one of my kind of family from my high school days is here. So like in my life, I certainly have, people that I would consider even closer than, friends that are sort of in that almost family category, right, of friendship. So again, just acknowledging that, especially if we don't have that family of origin connection in our lives, that again, how important those relationships can be to our deeper aspects of our health, right? And the effects of that quote unquote loneliness, even if we have people sort of around us, right? If we don't feel that connection, that's what we're really after here with the social health, and seems to be the what is the definition of social health, right? I would say a little bit of that connection aspect, and we'll get into that.
What do you do without family? When you have family, and you lost your son at 54,
Sure.
and then you have a daughter that doesn't talk to you for.
Sure. So, again, it's I can't pretend to have the answer to every situation, right? But I think one thing I would say that you have done, knowing you, is you have expanded that family bubble, right, to include maybe some friendships that you consider almost like family members, right? And that's I think the only thing we can do. Sometimes we can't change. Well, we definitely can't change other people. And we can't change, what I was going to say is we can't change our family of origin, right? So we can't change the people that are blood related to us. But again, we can perhaps, and we get into this a little bit, building healthy boundaries around those people. And sometimes that unfortunately means maybe a very distant or not really existent relationship is perhaps the best way forward. And again, I realize that sounds harsh to say, but I think that sometimes that is maybe what some of us have to do. And that's, again, very painful, and probably takes a lot of emotional processing and other, strengths, I would say, or efforts, let's say, to do that. But sometimes it's necessary. Coworkers, boss, right? So this is, again, just, if you work in a larger office environment, do you say hi to people? What is your, again, you can't always change your boss, right? But there's different ways to sort of interact. Does that mean something to you? Again, it's a part of many of our lives. Many of us don't work alone. Again, I realize a lot of us do work from home and other things now more than we used to in the future. And again, sort of time might tell whether that's perhaps, a negative or positive in some ways. Or again, as many things, maybe it's both for some people. But just acknowledging here, right, that this is a relationship in our lives, that it can be a force for sort of to increase your health, or it can be in some ways damaging to your health, and you do have some control over some aspects of that, right? You don't always have control for who your boss is, but maybe you have control of where you work. And again, I realize people have to make ends meet, and can't control lots of aspects. And again, there's lots of nuance out there with this. But again, just to say that this is an important part of your life. You can't just compartmentalize, somewhere where you're at 8 hours, 40 hours a week, and say that that doesn't affect me at all. Right? We just need to acknowledge that that does affect our health in some way, and definitely our social health specifically. And then here are others, I'd say just any other interactions, right? These are kind of people you maybe just meet in the grocery store, or, as you just are walking down the street, or, again, you just interact with other people. And sometimes just a smile, a nod, a hello, or things like that. You don't know what other people are maybe going through, and how important that might be to just see, something like love or happiness in the world around them. So just remembering, right, that we affect other people in sort of sometimes very unknown and never known ways. And that these little interactions we have with people sometimes really are more meaningful, perhaps to ourselves, and maybe again, perhaps to the other individual who maybe you never see again, right? But that again, there's some meaning or some that is again can have some impact and is not just meaningless. So some interaction styles here, right? So I talked a little bit about, again, attachment here, right? And the different kinds of attachment here. So there's a lot of different research that really supports some of these words and kind of that chart you see there: secure, dismissive. These are sort of, again, defined in the medical literature with some very specific terms. And again, these are tendencies, right? So to be clear, right, the point here is to understand your own attachment style so that you can sort of start there and move forward from that part in your life. This is not to say that, secure's the best and fearful's the worst. Again, there's I know those words have sort of an emotional connection to them. So just to realize that, again, this might be your tendency, and the only way out of, let's say, if you are more in that fearful, avoidant, disorganized kind of category, right, rather than sort of saying, oh, I wish I wasn't this way, the only way out of it is to really acknowledge that you are that way. And then we can start to maybe notice that in our interactions and sort of, make slight, changes in each day. And then that adds up over perhaps years, months and years, to something that looks like, not so fearful or avoidant, right? Being able to be vulnerable, being able to connect with people a little bit easier, right? And that these things happen, right, because a caregiver sort of didn't respond to your emotional states, maybe perhaps in the right way, right? This is what we've seen in the research, right, is that very early on in your first couple years of life, your caregiver in your interaction is supposed to sort of be this kind of play, dancing act, right, of reaction and acknowledgement and empathy and mirroring. And it's really, again, a really complex system of brain development early on. And it's all in that kind of right brain area that is not really part of that conscious brain. So again, I say this because, to me, I think saying something like that should hopefully increase compassion for all of us. That, what choice did you have at all of, anything before you were, 2 or 3 years old? Really, I would say, again, human beings are born so sort of fragile and helpless, from an early age, compared to, again, I always say, a deer just was born like behind the hospital and then hops around and walks off, and all the doctors are like looking out the window here. Literally, this happens like almost every year. So I hear a story like this. Right, compared to a human being, it takes, that full first year to even get those first few steps in, right? So anyway, so a lot of that is completely out of your control, right? So that's where I would say that compassion really comes in. This attachment style is not something you really get to choose. You do get to choose where you go from that, or whether you sort of accept this as, true or not, and try to move forward with that, right? So that's why I pause there on attachment for a little while, because this really is an important concept of how you're going to interact with everybody throughout your life, and maybe leads to perhaps, if you're having some issues with interactions, this might really highlight what might be at the root cause of that sort of thing. So that rolls real nicely right into conflict. So yeah, again, just acknowledging that we're not always going to get along with other people. So kind of again from the medical perspective or neuroscience kind of perspective, right? What's happening in conflict, right? Sometimes is heightened emotion, right? And when we get this heightened state of emotion, what we've seen in the neurobiology is that the front brain, the prefrontal cortex, shuts down, meaning that again, the part of your brain that is supposed to make rational choices and be intellectual and be able to kind of quote unquote think like a human being, right? Basically, so this is, we think kind of almost like an energetics model, right? So it's not that, so why does this happen, right? And part of it is survival maybe too, right? So this is a fear, flight, and fight response. So from a sort of deep evolutionary perspective, right, this makes some sense that for survival, if a lion's coming, just run. Don't think about, well, is it a lion? Is it really going to eat me? Maybe it'll eat the guy beside me. No, like just run. So, right, so that's sort of the thought of why we're built this way per se. But again, to go back to what happens, right, is that part of the brain just shuts down and you literally can't access sort of the networks that would help you maybe navigate the situation with some nuance and say kind of the things you really mean, other things of that nature, right, of sort of conflict navigation. So again, just remembering if you're in that heightened state, right, that it's okay to walk away, to do some sort of exercise, use some sort of tool, take some sort of pause, right? Just let them know, hey, a prompt might be, I don't want to say something I'm going to regret. I would like, or like, I'd like to solve this problem, but I don't want to say something I will regret later. Can we talk about this in 5 minutes, right? Or 10 minutes or whatever kind of time you might need. If that's the best you can do, I think hopefully if the other party can't respect that, then again, that's sort of a situation that's very difficult and may lead to, sort of, again, a bigger conflict, right? And then I'd say maybe at another time after whatever happens, right, we try to come back and build healthier boundaries with this person. Codependence, kind of an important just concept here in interaction styles, right? What this refers to is, and again, some degree of this is really necessary and perhaps healthy in certain relationships. Let me say just as a primer, so it's not all bad as it maybe gets spun sometimes, right? But too much codependence is anything, right? Dose is the problem here. So too much codependence, meaning kind of making your emotional states very much being dependent on the things around you, specifically maybe the emotional states and responses of the people around you. And again, maybe particular people, especially, right? So, right, and this is just trying to separate, to realize that your emotional state doesn't have to be connected to other people's emotional states, right, is kind of the concept here of health, or that building some space there, right, so that you can evaluate whether that's a healthy, let's not even say healthy, right, let me say, is that a productive response for you in that time, or is this maybe gonna not get you to your deeper goals, right? So right, and allowing us to stay in that more intellectual, kind of a cognitive part of our brain, and not just being kind of in that pure emotional response, right, or reaction mode, which is a big part of the balance of health, right? So yeah, that's just, again, a really important concept, I would say, in social health, and finding our way to sort of be the best we can in social interactions. Romantic partners here. So again, this is, I think, an essential part of the human experience, right? I think many of us really yearn for some sort of intimate connection. Again, I believe that people really deserve to find that in whatever way they really find meaningful, as long as each party's sort of really consenting and open and has a real connection, right? And we'll talk again about some of those things that define social health, right? But just acknowledging here that this can really look a lot of different ways for different people, and that really what's important here is communication and openness, and that there's a real connection, again, acknowledging that this is a big, maybe a really important part of the human experience, right? And that all of us have sort of a spectrum of how much we want this, but I think this is a part of what we want out of social interactions. And then just, again, some sort of personality types. These are just some common ones, but there's many others out there. But, kind of these people pleaser, antagonists, competing, collaborating, all these types of different kind of, styles of interaction, realizing, right, again, that being healthy is not that, oh, well, I'm a people pleaser, so I'll never be healthy. No, that's not her. I'm an antagonist, so everybody's going to hate me all the time. No, that's not really true, right? Just realizing maybe that's your tendency, right? And then you can start to actually maybe bend that a different direction, or to use that. Again, sometimes our weaknesses are our strengths too, right? And then really that's the best way to think about these sort of things is, okay, I am this way, right? So how can I use this sort of feature of my personality to increase my well-being and maybe the well-being of the people around me, right? That's sort of the trick here of health, really, of being healthy, is to turn those sort of quote weaknesses hopefully into something that can be even seen as a strength in certain settings for you. So what are kind of some of the important concepts of relationship health? Let's see here, we've got time. Okay. Communication, I've hit this several times now, right? So just how important communication is, open communication, honest communication. This means that you really know what you want and think a little bit, right? So some self-reflection is needed here. Again, this is sort of just talk about social health, which again means how do you as an individual interact with other people. So a lot of this is about sort of individual mental health too, right? And sort of knowing yourself in a lot of ways. So I know that I've talked a lot about that, but that's really the only way you are socially healthy. So, and this means, again, sort of being vulnerable, letting people know what you've been through, opening up with maybe personal stories, right? And just letting people know how you maybe feel right now. That seems like, I really think that this is becoming more common in the culture, which I think is a great thing for all of us, really, to help us be healthy, right? There was, maybe some ideas out there that were more prominent before, that this was not something that we should be doing, right? Or that you can only share these things with certain types of people. And we're all human beings, and we all have these emotional states, and they're necessary for our lives and drive our biology. And I think acknowledging that is just, acknowledging that we're what we are, right? So it's nothing more than that. So that's, to me, maybe what vulnerability really is just being, true to what we are in some ways. Can't talk about relationship health without talking about the concept of gratitude. This is something, a cool concept I heard about, was there's an interview, I can't remember the guy's name, on Peter Attia's podcast, The Drive, where he talks to a man who talks about doing these kind of friend summits, where he just brings people in, they all kind of talk about, share something about themselves and just talk about being grateful about, for their connections and friendships, right? So, the kind of Say It Now campaign is what he's famous for. So sort of expressing gratitude to those friends and mentors, not waiting for some moment, right? That if you're grateful for those things, expressing that thing more often to them is something that's really, really important. Again, it's led to a lot of really interesting, meaningful interactions in my life personally, just expressing this gratitude to my mentors. It's something I have certainly practiced throughout my life. And I'd say sometimes you get no response, or you just get sort of a short response. And sometimes it really opens a door that wouldn't have been open before, and leads to relationships that never would have maybe happened before too. Right. So not every time, again, just it's not to, gratitude should be without expectation, is sort of where maybe I'm going with that story, right? Is that, but when you give it, I think a lot of really great gifts usually come from that. So boundaries, right? Again, super important concept in relationships. So what is a boundary, right? I think a boundary is basically saying that, a boundary should not necessarily require something of someone else is one definition. I've sort of heard of this, right? It's something that you're going to take in action. Hey, if you don't stop talking to me about this, I'm going to leave the room or building or whatever, right? So that is a boundary, not like, hey, please stop talking. That is a request, right? So that's kind of the twist there, right, of what a boundary should be, a healthy boundary should be. So if we can think about that concept a little bit specific to the situation, right, of how can I hold a healthy boundary, express what it is I need from the situation, but not necessarily require a lot of action from anyone else, right? That would be the ideal, let's say, kind of healthy boundary definition. Play, again, I think I've hit on this concept several times, right? This is a essential part of the mammalian development process, right? So when we look at bears and lions and all, mice and dogs and cats and all sorts of other, even especially, again, primates as well, right? Our closest relatives in the evolutionary branches, right? We see that play is an essential part of our lives, especially childhood, but even into adulthood in lots of ways, right? There's just so much of our behavior that's tied to play in our lives, and we kind of relegate this to childhood, right? And my kind of message here, right, is that find ways to play in as an adult too, right? We have to find ways to play cards or do something in our lives that really functions as this play. Again, a lot of good research and resources here, right, of what that means to a deeper level. But I would say it's a really essential part of that human experience, right? And if we're not getting this in our adult lives, we really should try to make that a part of our lives in some way. And these things might be around a shared interest, right? So sometimes we can kind of combine a lot of these things together, right, for increased health and efficiency here. So shared interests, include, again, a game. Maybe it's a physical activity. Maybe it's a meditation circle or some sort of spiritual or other kind of connection service, right? Maybe this is whatever, calling your child or calling your dad or whatever it is, right? This is just, sorry, shared interests more I'm talking about, but doing something with them, right? For a bike ride or, going out and doing something that you both enjoy. Yeah, so again, there's a lot of different ways and then this is a good way to find new social connection, right? Is you like rock climbing, go to kind of a social event, right? That might be around that. And then you find people that have some other common, things with you, right? So this is a way to sort of increase interactions as well. Intentions and growth, right? I think this is a part of relationship health, right? Of defining what that relationship is, right? What is the intentions of this relationship? Are we, again, boss coworker, right? And what lines need to be drawn around that? Are we, again, friends, right? But maybe not in that inner family circle. And, that, again, what is the intentions or what are the, where do both people want to be with that relationship, right? I think even, again, that ties to communication, maybe communicating those intentions, especially maybe in issues where there's conflicts, right? Perhaps each side has different intentions of what this relationship is supposed to be. Romantic relationships come to mind, kind of talking about this as well, right? So, right, being open about that, not maybe, again, there's sort of, Esther Perel talks about kind of 3 different styles, right? Sort of pursue, avoid, kind of, the 3 styles of kind of intimate, interaction there, right? So what are the different intentions and can we be more open about that, right? And lead to kind of just a better experience for both parties, right? And are we looking to grow, right, in some way? So is the relationship sort of stagnant and going nowhere, right? Or do we have some intentions to sort of find ways to increase connection and gratitude and some of these other things and work on boundaries? And right, is if the other party has no intention for growth or no really, again, sort of they're not interested in that concept, and you really are, then maybe that's not a good match, right, for whatever that interaction is. So just acknowledging that that's okay, and that, again, we can find other interactions where people are on the same level with us. And then again, just validation and accountability. This is what sometimes these circles allow, kind of do for us too, right? So this might be, let's say, even like support groups, or like a AA meeting or something like that, which really, functions to really be meaningful part of some people's lives, right? And really provides that accountability, that validation. Again, it can be all sorts of different things. This can be spiritual views. This can be, again, around those shared interests. This can be around sort of problems in your life, or it can be around sort of, positive things like fitness or mental health or other things like that too. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think when it comes to gratitude, it can also be a really helpful tool with conflict and compassion. So if there's people that consistently you have conflict with, or you just can't see eye to eye with, I think seeing it through the lens of gratitude of like, okay, what does this person add, or what value does this person bring to this relationship? Or if you have to go have a hard conversation with someone that you know won't agree with you or whatnot, I think recognizing where you can have gratitude for their perspectives or value for their experiences, I think that can just help grow in compassion for other people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, compassion, empathy. I would say those are, probably should definitely be on this slide too. But yeah, no, thank you for adding that. So what are some different ways to kind of improve our social health, or to maybe practice some of these concepts? Right. So I would say volunteering in certain things, if you have a particular interest, again, sort of, right. So finding a way to become involved in that particular interest, or even volunteering with certain groups, right? Then you meet people that are sort of like-minded, wanting to maybe look for the same thing as you, again, the same intentions, right? And are looking for growth too often in these environments, right? So you're already a couple steps ahead from being in a healthy environment for increasing social health. Again, not always true of every volunteering experience, just, in general, that's, can be true of a lot of experiences there. So the CARS method, this is from a Huberman Lab kind of a lawyer who's talking about dealing with high conflict people, right? But I thought this was just a nice little acronym, and some important concepts, right, of dealing with, especially maybe conflicts, trying to connect, right? So just basically what you were just saying here, right, of having, and how do you connect with somebody? I think you have to sort of have some empathy and compassion and gratitude, right? That you have to believe that they have something to contribute, that they have maybe, again, some value, right? I think is what we're getting at here, seeing that they're another human being, right? And that's at the kind of heart of connection there. So then, right, once you get out of that emotional kind of reaction, again, going back a little bit to the neurobiology, right, you get out of that sort of fight and flight emotional response sphere of the brain, and then you can actually connect to these networks that do the analyzing and responding, right, which is the real kind of resolution of the problem. What is the actual problem here? Oh, actually, I didn't sleep very well, and I'm being, a baby. I'm sorry. So, which is something I say sometimes. Right. So then I can kind of analyze, respond in a way that hopefully someone that cares for me sort of would hear and say, okay, I can give you a break this time. And then setting those limits. Okay, I need to whatever, maybe go and lay down or do a workout or whatever. So kind of making it personal here. But what does that look like? Maybe right in a conflict situation, right? That might be a common thing, right? So then just again, we have to. This is not magic, right? This is again neuroscience tells us that this is impossible essentially when you're in that heightened emotional state, right? So we have to sort of realize that we're in this stress response, step away so we can get to this connecting kind of phase, right? And even into the rest of this method, right? So having the wherewithal that, okay, I'm in emotional response kind of place, and I need to step away in order to, again, do the rest of this. The apology, right? This is kind of an art, right? And this is again, this is almost a method of an apology above as well, right? Is, okay, I screwed up and I'm going to, maybe do something different moving forward, right? And really connecting with what it is that maybe you have to apologize for that might have hurt that other person's feelings, right? So this is a pretty nuanced art here. There's a lot of good work on sort of the art of the apology, right? But I would say again, the essential parts of this is really understanding the other person's experience, right? And valuing that to some degree, I would say, are sort of some essentials of the art of the apology. I mentioned interest groups a couple of times already, right? So just realizing that, shared interests can lead to some really meaningful connections with other people. And just in communication, right? How do we kind of improve maybe our communication style, right? I would say some important concepts here are active listening. So an example would be, oh, I heard you say XYZ. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Right. Or something, some inquisitive questions like that sort of acknowledge, in what you say that you sort of heard what the person said, you processed it, and you're asking sort of almost a follow-up question. Right. So if you don't know what this looks like, or maybe are someone that is noticing that perhaps you do all the talking, then we can start to practice, right, this sort of thing with a prompt, which often leads to, again, sort of really opening the door for people to be much better, or find more creative ways to do this, right? But that's where a prompt really can help. If you just said, if you can't do anything else, right, set it a goal to sort of ask a question like this in a social setting that you're in. And I think an essential part of that, again, I've sort of hit this several times, right? Really being curious, right? I think people have amazing experiences and knowledge to share. If you just let them and kind of ask the right questions and give them kind of that open place to say, what their experience is, right, openly with you. Sometimes it's so amazing, right? It can really just increase awe and gratitude for that person and just your life. So again, it's just having that curiosity and that empathy and that value, right, of others, and maybe this starts with self-care and self-value, right? If perhaps you don't even feel that way about your own kind of self, right, then we have to kind of start there and realize that we all have something to add to this world and each other. This is just a concept that I heard that I thought was really an interesting perspective, right? If we have no other sense of sort of what our deeper purpose is as human beings, right? I would say from an evolutionary biological kind of perspective, I really feel like this is at least part of it, is being kind of good ancestors to the rest of humanity here, not just to your, direct biological family, right? But maybe to all of our kind of just genetic brethren as Homo sapien, and I think, again, if we trust sort of what we're seeing as far as the patterns of how life emerged and kind of is here on Earth, I would say, again, part of that has to be sort of helping our species move forward, right? And that's what I'm talking about here, good ancestors. But kind of expanding that bubble to, I would say that in order to do that, right, to be a healthy human being, you have to have clean air, clean water, maybe access to some, reasonable source, quality sources of nutrition, right? And so then, again, realizing that that's all interconnected with maybe other people and maybe nature in a lot of ways, right? So again, that's sort of my opinion here of, how to really increase this in your life, right? Is realizing we're all sort of interconnected, and that, again, that if you have no other purpose, sort of serving the rest of, your fellow kind of genetic partners in this planet that gave you this life is, I think, an amazing, awesome purpose, personally. So, social events, right? This is kind of obvious, but I do put this on here that, of course, going to events around shared interests or growth or learning how to be, whatever, apologize or rebuild these other relationships, So there's a lot of things out there, and the world, I think, today is much more open. I think if you don't find something here in like a small town like Canyon City, right, the internet has opened the door to a lot of this type of thing too, right, where our social circle doesn't necessarily have to be physical. Again, there's a good balance there, right? If you'll have only virtual interactions with people, that does not seem to sort of always be the best thing for human beings. I do think we have to be rooted in some physical interactions with people too. And so, but again, that's not to say that virtual interactions can't be meaningful. I do think that, it's a very amazing thing that we've created, and has really opened the door to connect with people in ways that we weren't able to before. So again, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but hopefully this at least gets you thinking and gets you moving in the right direction. And then again, a really important kind of slide here that I'll pause on. Certainly did not come up with everything I've said here just off the top of my head. This is something that, I owe a lot of gratitude and, respect for the work that's been done right in these fields to really allow me to make the statements I've made today, and for us to all sort of benefit from that and find ways to really improve our lives, right? And so these are just a very short list of people that have influenced me personally and sort of my outlook that I've shared with you today. Dr. Becky Kennedy in the parenting field, Esther Perel, who's again world-renowned for sort of sexual relationships, romantic relationships, but just relationships in general as well. She's just really has a lot to say about just again, interacting with any other human being. The Gottman Institute is again sort of the Gottmans, who are a couple that did couples therapy, again, have a lot of insights into not just intimate relationships, but I'd say, again, relationships with everyone. The Say It Now movement around friends and mentors. Brene Brown, who has just a huge body of work on sort of self-improvement and relationships, or workspace, kind of relationships, all sorts of different things that she talks about. Carolyn, maybe you could speak to the power of fun a little bit and sort of maybe what's the message there or some highlights from that.
I think it just really ties on to what you were saying about as children, we get taught how to play, but then it really does die out as you get older in our culture, and just the importance of it and how it really can be incorporated into your life. It's not something that's separate. It's really integrated. I think is kind of her main
Sure.
thing.
Yeah, great. So lucky for me, it sounds like something I sort of hit on.
Yeah.
So again, some great podcasts. Many of these, that I share with several other, talks that I've done. But again, I would say very much would express some more gratitude for, Dr. Huberman, Dr. Atia, specifically, who have been big influences on sort of allowing me to really empower some of the things I want to do with this practice. So again, they have great material here on mental health, as well as social health, again, as well as a lot of the physical kind of aspects. And again, so these other, those two, again, on purpose, I don't think I've heard that one. So if you'd expand a little bit on that podcast, yeah. Always willing to learn more. So
on purpose, with Jay Shetty, he has kind of different topics about like leadership development as well as relationships. So those are like romantic relationships, but also the other ones you interact with. So like coworkers. He brings on a lot of other guest speakers. So he had,
Sure.
I'm pretty sure he had the Gottmans on
Great.
from the Gottman Institute.
Yeah.
So he's had Brene Brown on, that
Sure.
sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
he's just a great source for that as well.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah. And Becky Kennedy, again, that's her podcast. And she has a website. They have like an app, actually, I believe. I was looking at this the other day. If any kind of parents out there are really maybe looking for something to help with their relationships with their children, right? This is someone who I've really respected a lot of, basically everything I've heard her talk about. She's got a good TED Talk on parenting. And then I just recently learned about this Good Inside kind of tool that you can use where even in the moment, if you're having a conflict with your child, right, as a parent, you can actually go to this for advice in real time, which I hadn't seen a product quite like that So again, how technology can sometimes really improve our lives, right? So that's one example there.
I
So
also just wanted to add, Brene Brown, a lot of her research started from vulnerability.
that's
She has
right.
a TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability.
Right.
And so she's also a good source if you struggle with vulnerability specifically.
Yep. Yeah. And again, kind of plug for Brene Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability there from Carolyn. So, okay. So that's everything I had prepared. I don't know if there's any other topics or questions or comments or something like that from the folks that are here. And I can pause for that.
This is helpful as I'm preparing to retire in about a year because they kind of shift my social health and the people I interact with. And I've been putting a lot of thought into what will I do and how will I get more time around people after
Sure.
retirement.
Yeah.
So,
Just a comment there on retirement, right? So yeah, again, there's a lot of transitions, I would say, right?
yeah.
So we, kind of, I should maybe put this in the talk, right? But we have this natural transitions in our lives a lot of times from school to maybe college or workplace, right? And then maybe into retirement, if we get married, right? Or have children, right? These are these big events, right? And just acknowledging that these are big transitions in our lives, I think is an important, thing. Not just expecting that everything will sort of just somehow magically fall into place. That yes, it does take some thought and some intention, some communication, a lot of these other concepts we talked about, right? But yeah, that again, not being surprised, perhaps I would say, would be one way to kind of maybe flip that to how would we make that, how do we find a healthy way to deal with this, right? Is to actually acknowledge it's going to happen naturally. Great. Go ahead and stop the recording.